This is an instructional video showing the installation of a 250mm twin rail Z slide for a standard Elegoo Mars 3D resin printer. So step 1, unbox the kit. It's fairly sturdily packaged, so it should arrive in good condition, I hope. Inside there's a couple of instruction leaflets. The smaller one advises you not to hold the slide vertically without restraining the carriage, because it could drop off completely and the steel balls might drop out. There's a packing list with a QR code linked to this video. Right, so on with the actual product. It's wrapped in corrosion resistant paper, so hopefully there won't be any rusting. Right, there's a pack with an anti-backlash spring, some grease and a cutting guide that's used to cut the lead screw, the existing lead screw shorter. There's a couple of screws that can be fitted to the build plate carrier to make it easier to tighten it up successfully and firmly. There's a shorter slotted octo switch interrupter which replaces the longer one fitted as standard. It's needed for about 2% of Mars apparently. I don't know why, but and there are some longer screws for the octo switch itself because the ones it comes with are perilously short. And there's an 8mm standard spring coupling, and most importantly there's the T8 lead screw, T8 2mm pitch Acme lead screw extension, and of course the slide itself. You'll need a few tools for assembly. I prefer screwdriver type hexagon wrenches, although the L-shaped type were fine. This one's 3mm, 2.5 and 2, and a 5mm L-shaped wrench for the replacement screws to hold the build plate, and a 2.5mm wrench. You'll need to shorten the lead screw, and to do that you'll need a hacksaw, ideally a high-speed steel blade as the screw is stainless steel, a medium or fine file, and a small vise of some sort. So let's get on with stripping it down. First you need to remove the cover, obviously. Remove the vat. It just so happens it has some resin in it at the moment, but you can easily cover that over. I usually use 2 bits of wood that come with the packaging, but one day I'll make a single piece of wood that covers the whole thing. Take off the build plate. Remove the cap, which I suppose is there just in case for some reason the mechanism overruns its electronic stops. I guess it just stops it coming right off the top of the lead screw. Need to remove the rear half of the case with 2mm hex wrench. There's no need to disturb the front half, not necessary. There's just the 4 screws, but it's possible that the top plate will be clamped down on it rather hard. Some earlier Mars are like that. Using a sharp implement you can remove the black rubber ring that covers the screws which hold the nut into the build plate carrier. You need a 2.5mm hex wrench. There's no need to completely remove the screws, just undo them and leave them in their holes. There are actually washers underneath them, so there's 8 bits to lose if you tip it upside down. Once removed, you can take the whole build plate and carriage off. You can remove the carriage, you won't be needing that, but you do need the screws. Okay, you can put that back onto the original Z slide. Hand over the top to retain the screws. Remove the flag that interrupts the opto switch, the homing switch. Remove the existing nut. It's an anti-backlash nut, but the spring is, so discard that one. And there's a new one in the kit. It's wrapped around the grease tube. Pop that one on. Okay, unplug the stepping motor cable. They're often a bit stiff, but just wiggle it, it'll come out. Remove the two screws holding the stepping motor to the deck plate. And you can carefully remove the stepping motor completely from the underside, like that. Now you can remove the original column. You need, I think, a 3mm hex wrench for that. Remember that the opto switch, the slotted opto home switch, is still connected, so don't let the column drop. And remove the two M3 screws retaining that. Now done with the old column. There are two replacement screws for those short ones holding the opto switch in the kit. We need to remove the vibration damper for the motor before you cut the lead screw to length, and that's to allow the little plastic C-shaped cutting guide to go right against the front of the motor. So slip that off. My vise has aluminium jaws. If yours doesn't, you may like to use card or something to protect the screw. Put the cutting guide on. Right, I'm not actually going to cut this one. Anyway, once cut, you need to deburr the end with a fine file. If you point the motor downwards a bit, then the swarf won't fall back into the bearings. It's not terribly crucial. The nut doesn't have to go over that section. So, time to start reassembly. Firstly, you need to remove the carriage plate from the slide. You might notice that there's a trapezium arrangement of holes in one end, the end that the opto switch interrupter points at, and there's a rectangular array at the other end. If your machine needs a rectangular array, then reassemble it with the plate pointing the other way, or in other words, turn the column upside down. You've got both sets of holes. So, complete removing the plate. Now, with the opto switch interrupter pointing downwards and taking care not to let the force nut retaining screws drop out, using the original carriage screws, fix the build plate holder onto the carriage plate. They need to be tightened up very firmly. You can't get at them afterwards, or not without taking it all to pieces again. In the kit you'll find some longer screws than the short ones provided to retain the actual opto switch, and also a short blade. About 2% of Mars actually need those in place of the longer one that I've fitted. Anyway, install the slotted opto switch while you can get at it easily. It's 2 M3 by 8 or so screws. Next, reinstall the column using the original 4 screws on the underside, M4 threads those are. If they don't go in easily, then do please check that you've got the right hole pitch and that the column is the right way up, and tighten them pretty firmly. It doesn't matter that it doesn't fit down in its socket, it's meant to bridge over the top of it. So before reinstalling the motor, I just need to orientate it properly, the connectors in the right direction, and position the vibration damper. That's fitted with 2 M3x6 screws. And slip the motor in from the underside. I think they're M3x8 or 10 or something from the top to fix it, but leave them loose because you have to float the motor on some models, not all of them, not every version of Mars, but some of them don't have a location register on the front of the vibration damper. So if you've got that sort, you need to float it. Fit the 8mm spring coupling, half on, half off, and do it up nice and firmly. You may find that there are some small burrs on the top of the lead screw that stops a nut from screwing on properly. So with a small Swiss file, needle file, just remove those on the what you think of as the top end or one end, and you should be able to fit the nuts nice and easily then. That's it. Right. Place it into the socket on the top of the coupling and tighten it up nice and firmly. You need to apply some grease to the screw from the small tube provided in the kit. An Allen key or any old stick shaped thing is suitable. It's easier to screw the lead screw into the nut rather than the other way round. Screw the lower nut on until just the dogs project. Compress the spring down and then screw into the top nut, making sure that there's sufficient engagement between the top and bottom parts of the nut. Maybe screw it down so there's about 3 centimeters or so projecting. At this point you can drop the carriage and build plate carrier back on and tighten up the screws. At this point you can reattach the bearing blocks to the carriage plate using the M3x8 screws that you removed earlier. Best to insert all the screws before you finally tighten them. Then replace the little rubber cover over the nut screws. Then replace the column cap in the rear pair of holes using a 3mm Allen wrench, hex wrench, the M4 screws. Plug the stepping motor cable back in. Lower the carriage right to the bottom. Float the motor to the centre of its free play and tighten up the screws firmly. You only need to do that if you've got the sort of vibration damper that doesn't locate the motor for you. Okay, then refit the rear cover. It's held on by M3x6 countersunk screws, the original ones you took off. It's possible that the cover itself is a bit tight, in which case you may want to loosen the 4 screws in the top and also squeeze it together to get it back together. If you do loosen them, don't forget to retighten those screws in the top. Included in the kit are new build plate screws, which give you much more purchase, so you can get the ball joint much tighter. So remove the original set screws and fit these new M6x14 cap head screws. And you'll need a 5mm wrench to tighten those, but for the moment leave them loose because we're going to level. So make sure that the build plate is free to move. Make sure there's no dirt on the glass or on the underside of the build plate. Use 0.08mm thickness paper and press home. Leave it to settle. Check that it's parallel to the front of the machine. Hold it down and tighten the screws firmly but not too tightly. There you are. The Eiffel Tower model is one I downloaded from Thingiverse and stretched to 250mm tall. I'm just raising the build plate up to 260mm, which is how far it needs to go in order to comfortably clear 250mm models during building. There's a simple G-code mod for that. It's only a few lines of code and you can run it as if it was a print. I'll put it up on my website for free download, but I'm sure you can find it elsewhere. I think it's only about 3 lines of code. Obviously a taller machine needs a taller cover. There are various solutions to this problem. One is you can 3D print a block. Again, I'll put the G-code up on my website, and that will allow the cover to sit on top and clear the knob. You can see there I've extended the cover just with a bit of cardboard, just the kind that's used for manila file folders, and it's held on with sellotape. So card and a block is one option. Another is to 3D print an extension piece. Again, you can download the file from my shop. It's a free download. That's an early version. It's not exactly the same as that, but there are 8 bosses which were intended for screws to clamp on the bottom of the cover, but in fact it's quite a tight fit, so I'm not sure they're really necessary. So with the extension you can't see what's going on at the VAT level, but you don't need the block that I showed you earlier, and either way it's perfectly good. Both work equally well. That's it. There we are.